Hello, I'm Alan, welcome to the Guitar Shack. Today's video I'm going to walk you through what I do on a silver service for this customer's Stratocaster that I've got in. I thought this one would be a good example of the kind of work that I do. This customer's had this for a long time. It's 1989 Squier Stratocaster made in Korea. It's an S9 serial number, which means that it's built in the Samick factory, which is pretty well regarded. And although he, when he initially contacted me, he said that it was mainly for sentimental value, actually these are pretty well regarded Korean Strats, so it's going to be interesting to see what I can do to bring it back to its glory. But yeah, it needs a bit of love. Luckily it's come to the right place. Here's the back view. As you can see, it's complete with the plate on the back of the tremolo cavity, which is good and it's quite often missing. Dusty, it's got a couple of scratches in the finish, it's got a sticker residue there, and then the net looks reasonably good. It's got these better quality tuners which hopefully will work okay. Some of the later Squiers came with what they call trapezoid tuners and they're a bit rubbish. So the first thing I'm going to do is get these strings off and give it a right good clean just to get it a bit more sanitary to actually work on. These strings are absolutely coated, so you can get them off and see where we get to. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is just give it a good wipe down with a damp cloth just to get rid of all the dust. This isn't in any way meant to be the sort of the final cleaning, but it's just to get it to a more sanitary condition. It's been pretty dusty, and the dust will be all over it everywhere. So I'm going to give it a full strip down, get the pick guard off, get right into it. I haven't tested the electronics yet, I'll do that as part of the process. But let's get it a bit cleaner and more sanitary to work on first. Underneath all of that, it's actually not bad. It hasn't been used much. The key thing about the damp cloth method of cleaning is don't leave the water on it. As soon as it's on, wipe it off again. But it gets rid of 90% of the goop. And when you're going to get into it, that's what you want. Yeah, it's going to take some chemicals to get that sticker residue off it. Got some scratches on the back, but it's not too bad. Ah, it looks like a Stratocaster again. So, first things first, we're going to drop the neck off. Which may be the first time it's ever been done. Now, for those people who are horrified at the idea of taking the neck and the body apart, my view is that's the whole point of the way that Leo Fender designed these instruments. They're designed to come apart for maintenance, for replacement of necks, and they come off, they go back on again. As part of the setup process, it might come off and go back on again as well if it needs a shim. So do not be alarmed, no Stratocasters were harmed in the process. Neck plates come off nice and easily. Looks quite clean and unmolested under there. Let's see what we've got. Nice tight fit in the neck pocket. So we've got a truss rod, we've got a skunk stripe. It looks like these looks like relatively unmolested. It doesn't look like it's been off and on much. And then no markings in the body cavity, neck cavity. But you can see the laminate construction, you can tell it's a Squier. Okay, so far so good. Next up, we're going to delve inside. Too big. Too small. Just right. The most important part about any strip down of any guitar is having a handy box to keep absolutely everything in. This looks like the trem block is a full-sized one, like they use on Mexican Fenders, which is a good sign of a quality guitar. These early Squiers are interesting in that they are nice guitars, well built, but using cheaper components, as you would expect. Okay, so it's not full size, but it's better than some of the half-sized ones that are in there. Get ground wires present, and that's okay. We've got the trem set up with the V-shaped springs, which I don't like. I'll probably move those so there's a direct pull. We'll see what happens when I set it up. And then let's get in under the pickguard and see what we've got. Got some very rusty screw heads. Might tidy them up a bit. But it seems they're all in straight and they all come straight out again and they're not chewed. So again, possibly quite original under here. I think the issue with this one is going to be it's not been played and it's just accumulated lots of dirt and goop over the years rather than there being any actual problems with the guitar itself, hopefully. But it seems pretty straight underneath all the goop and dirt. And certainly the knobs and the pickup plastics have got a nice kind of vintagey sheen on them. So I think it's going to be quite an attractive vintage guitar, albeit not an expensive vintage guitar. Right, let's see what we've got. Yep, that is definitely a Squier. So we've got these, oh, that's a mechanical switch. That's interesting. So it is actually a metal three-way. It's three-way? No, it's five-way. With a spring and everything in it. Tiny little pots, but all original. And these double bar ceramic magnets on the, or ceramic pickups with the double bar magnets. Interesting. So you can see the level of goop and gunk that gets caught under the pickguard on these things. We can sort all that out. But everything is fairly pristine, just dusty. Here's a quick shot of the trim cavity. So I'm going to unhook all of this and remove the trim, give it a proper clean, get right into all the metalwork. I will take the claw off, which will give me a bit more give, because I don't want to disturb what I think is the original wiring and the original soldering. I want to keep it as factory standard, which will preserve the value in the instrument. So that'll give me some room to manoeuvre. Just giving the jack socket a bit of a clean up. I don't know if you can see, but basically years of accumulated goop. And it's one of those things that is not so easy to clean when it's assembled, but it's very easy to just whip it out. There you go, nice and clean. We'll give that a polish. And it's one of those things that is not so easy to clean when it's assembled, but it's very easy to just whip it out. There you go, nice and clean. We'll give that a polish. Right, next I'm going to disassemble the pick guard itself, because it means I can get in and I can clean up all the plastics, because I've got a lot of goop under the knobs, around the switch and around the pickups themselves. Easy to do, and that'll just take me 5 minutes. Okay, so the next question is what to do with the switch and the pots. Now the switch is easy because it's just mechanical and it drops out, and that's fine. But the pots themselves, they are on quite tight, and I'm just considering what to do about that, because they are fairly fragile plastic, which has been on there for quite some time by the looks of it, and it may well have got somewhat welded onto the aluminium of the shaft, or well, it may not be aluminium, but the metal of the shaft of the pot, and I don't really want to get in the way of that if they're not coming off nice and easily, which these are not. No, I mean, you work them steadily, but so what I'm going to do is I'm going to clean as closely as I can underneath these without actually taking them off. So some of these scratches are coming off and some of them are a bit too deep, but that's okay. It's a 30-year-old instrument. It's a 35-year-old instrument actually, and it should have some battle scars on it, or else it's led a very sad life. Again, I'm not going to use anything too abrasive on this pick guard. I'm just going to give it some elbow grease. It's a single ply pick guard, as you would expect in a Squier. And there's nothing wrong with that. A lot of this stuff is just crusted on after many years, and if you just leave it to just sit for a tiny, a minute or two, then it breaks down quite nicely and comes off. Obviously there's nothing electronics here, everything's on the other side, and I'm being careful not to let any actual liquid water flow anywhere. Just relying on the dampness and the friction of the wet cloth. Okay, that's looking a good bit better. Just going to give it a little bit of a rub over where some of the goopy parts are with contact cleaner, just a little bit. It should just lift off the can see it lifting the more stubborn, greasy parts. And it evaporates pretty quickly so it doesn't go anywhere. Just going to give it a little bit of a rub over where some of the goopy parts are with contact cleaner, just a little bit. It should just lift off I can see it lifting the more stubborn, greasy parts. And it evaporates pretty quickly so it doesn't go anywhere. The other thing you can use for this, which is really good, is lighter fluid, but I don't have any of that at the moment. This does the same thing. Okay, and then just get into all the screw holes, make sure that the rebates are clean. So here's the finished pick guard. Everything's been cleaned, polished, buffed within an inch of its life, so it's never going to look brand new, but it's clean and shiny and everything's original, and that's important. Okay, inside the pick guard now, all been reassembled. Everything's had a good blast of contact cleaner and reassembled. The same process for cleaning, so it's everything inside is nice and clean now. So now I'm going to get into some of these metal parts. The bridge is quite crusty, but it's not too bad. I've seen worse. Decent quality, and it's got the Fender stamped saddles, which is always nice to see. So I'm going to disassemble this completely, give everything a good clean, and then get it reassembled, ready for intonating it once the guitar is reassembled. And this is what 30 years worth of bridge looks like when you take it apart. So I'm going to clean all these. I'm going to get in and lubricate and release all these grub screws on the saddles, because these tend to jam up, so I'll do that before I do anything else to them. It's a bit better. And here's the bridge cleaned up, reassembled and ready to go back on. So that's us largely into reassembly territory now. Everything's cleaned up, and obviously before we put anything back together I want to make sure that the electrics work. So plug into an amp and then see what we've got. So neck and middle only, middle and bridge only. Okay, so volume works, neck tone works, middle tone. Yep, that's all good. Ready to go back together now. So the next thing I'm going to do is just do the polishing and around where the bits that are going to be covered up by the pick guard, so that that's all done, and then we don't need to butt up too closely to the pick guard itself when we're doing the main body. I'll do that after it's reassembled, but this is just getting in with a bit of polish. What you can't see because it's not up close is that this is bringing down some of the little ridges just where the pick guard had been. Okay. Now this is an interesting guitar because I spent a lot longer on it than I normally do, and the reason for that is because it's a completely original vintage guitar and it deserves it. And of course, because I operate on a flat rate basis, on this particular deal, I'm spending more time on it than is economically viable. On the other hand, if it was a brand new guitar, or if it was a much newer one, it would take me a lot less time. So, you know, it swings and roundabouts. You win some, you lose some. But this one is definitely worth it. And then for the same reason, you know, these cavities are completely unlined. The backing plate is completely unlined. And the reality is that the electronics themselves are cheap and could really benefit from an upgrade. But of course, you wouldn't do any of that on a guitar which is now 35 years old and original, because this is going to become a collector's item either for somebody already or at some point in the not too distant future, I would imagine. Certainly early Squier's values have been appreciating for some time. So I don't know what this is actually worth. I will give the gentleman some advice, I'll do some research. But I think, you know, he brought it to me on the basis of it having sentimental value only, and I think that's definitely not the case. I think there's more in this guitar than he might have originally thought. So I've checked that there's no wires in the way, and I'm just going to put in some screws around the edges just to hold the pickguard in place. I'm going to run the screws themselves over the top of my Dremel before I fit them all, just to burnish them up a little bit. Some of them are pretty rusty. Again, because of the vintage unmolested nature of the guitar, I'm being very careful to make sure that the screws go in their original threads. Again, because of the vintage unmolested nature of the guitar, I'm being very careful to make sure that the screws go in their original threads. Which is basically screw them backwards until you feel them drop in, and then tighten them up. And there we go. Next, I'm going to put the output jack back together, and then we'll do the trem. And then there's basically 2 screws on the claw, which I'm just going to put in roughly for now, and then they'll set the tension of the trem itself. Now, it wasn't floated when it came in, it was decked, so that's what I'll do with it. Just going to feed the earth wire back through, so it's not floating around inside the trem cavity itself. And then the next thing I'm going to do is a little bit of pyromania. Because I just want a little bit of candle wax on particularly these structural screws, which is the, well, it's not structural but they're important, the trem screws and the neck screws when I put them in. And the reason for that is just to help lubricate them as they go into the wood, particularly in older wood like this. Just a little bit on the end. Just give them a bit of a clean at the end. Sounds nice. Forgot to give this a clean, so let's do that. This is just a rag with a little bit of polishing compound on it, so I'll just bring up the ends. Not to a sheet, not to a gloss, but just to give them a little bit of a nicely burnished sheen, commensurate with the age of the guitar. Now, the important thing about the trem screws is that they don't actually go all the way in, because it needs to be able to flick like that. So, what you do, or what I do, is I screw the end ones in, because they're the most important ones, until they are just tight, and then I back them off a tiny little bit, so that they can a little bit of looseness, because they need to be loose to allow the bridge itself to pivot. There's an angle on the end of the plate. It's not a flat plate. There's a bevel to it, which then allows the trem to operate. And if you put them in all the way, it stops the trem being able to operate, which some people do deliberately to stop the trem from moving. It's quite a common thing to do with Strat, particularly if you're not actually into using a tremolo system, which I must admit I'm not. Never used them, but they do look cool. I like to put a Bigsby on a 335 or a Sheraton. It's about the only time I actually use a trem. Right, thank you for that. That'll do for now. So let's get these in. So that's now in, and then I'm going to back it off half a turn. Same at this end. So it's flat, and then backed off half a turn. That's a bit too much actually. Flat. Let's try quarter of a turn. Yep, that's moving. The objective here is that it doesn't rattle, that you get plenty of tone transferring, I guess, but it's got free movement, so that's fine, that's what you want. The objective here is that it doesn't rattle, that you get plenty of tone transferring, I guess, but it's got free movement, so that's fine, that's what you want. So over to the other side, and then we're going to whack on the springs. Now some people like to go in at an angle. That always seems odd to me, because it means that you're not pulling them straight as the way I think they were intended to be. So I put them in and I run my bridges straight, and then what I'll do is I'll give those a little tap just to see them. There we go. And there we have, so the ground wire is still there, the trem is installed, it's got give in it, it's good enough for now, and now that's ready for me to polish up the rest of the body work. Right, now that we've got the dirtier tasks out the way, I'm going to put a bit of polishing compound on the back here, and then give that a good going over. Just a bit of Maguire's, courtesy of your local car parts store. Does the same thing here, just takes off the top layer of gunk, goop, or whatever you've got going on your guitar body. It's pretty good for minor swirls. Won't take out anything serious from a big deep marks point of view, but it certainly sort of gives you a nice basis on the surface. And then it'll get a couple of coats of wax at the end. So just give this a good rub. Now that the dogs have stopped going mad, we'll buff that off. It's done a pretty decent job. Let's just give it another go. Doesn't take much, but it certainly brings up the sheen. It's always worth going over it again because the first coat just shows up the bits that you need to pay more attention to in the second coat. It doesn't take long. I've got a fair amount of small scratches just on the back here, but you know, 35-year-old guitar. Okay, so the sticker has left some marks behind. Ironically, because it's perfectly smooth and polished, and then it's a bit rougher where normal wear and tear has been subjected to the guitar, but it has been protecting it. So that's the back. Let's just do the front, and then we'll move on to the neck. Obviously we've already done round the pickguard, so this is more the edges at this point and the upper horn. Okay, that's the front, and just do around the edges, and then that's the bodywork complete. Something very satisfying about using this stuff and just sort of bringing that sheen back to something which is, you know, it's buried there underneath, but particularly when you first see it and it's been covered in gunk and dust for a number of years, it's pretty well hidden. And I'd like to say that this amazing transformation before your eyes is all down to my skill as a guitar whisperer, but in fact it's all just down to chemistry and McGuire's. And there we go. That turns out there was a Stratocaster under there. And a very pretty one too. Right, putting safely to one side and on with the neck. So it's a really nice neck. It's really nicely finished. The fretwork is very smooth at the edges. It's been properly set up and rolled. The fretwork is nicely installed. I think that's the original. I don't think it's had any work done to it coming out of the factory. So it just shows what quality Squier were putting into their instruments they were making at this period. So it's a maple neck. You can see that it's aged slightly. You can see the colour difference between the heel and the beautifully mellow gold colour of the rest of the neck, which is very smooth. There's no obvious dings in it. The nut is plastic but unmolested. There's a little scratch just on the first fret there. I don't think you'd feel it. There's a little dent in the second. Bit of play wear, but very little. Very little. You can see it, but you can't really feel it. So that's going to polish up nicely. It's got paint in the truss rod hole. It's another that's a fender identifier normally, so normally Squiers don't have that dark colour, and it's a bit of a giveaway when people are trying to flog you a fake fender. So that's good. And the tuners are all decent, tiny little play in them, but not much, more so on the G string. The E's are a tiny little bit gritty. I reckon they're going to be fine once they're strung. And you know, there's a few tiny little marks, but this is a really nice neck. It's a really nice guitar actually. So I'm going to give this a clean. And first thing I'm going to do is take off the string trees because they get in the way. So let's do that. So again, there's no fancy science to the cleaning process on a neck, particularly a maple neck. You can't use lemon oil or any of those kind of things that you typically use with rosewood. So it is literally wipe on, wipe off with a damp cloth. Don't let the water sit, but just make sure that you get all the residue of somebody else's gunk from many years of playing. It comes up very nicely. And then these frets, I'm going to polish them up. We'll check whether any of them need levelling, but I suspect, given the rest of the quality of this guitar, I actually think they might all be fine. Let's see, shall we? I'll put 50p on it. Tellingly enough, there is no gunk up at the business end. Which isn't a criticism, because I never go this far up a neck either. Strictly a pentatonics in G minor kind of guy. That looks pretty good. Dry those off. Nice bit of colour to this neck. I wouldn't say it was flamed, but it's got some figuring in the wood. Tuners never get cleaned, they're always dusty. They always get a bit grubby, so it's always worth giving them a bit of a good rub around when you have the opportunity. And then the back of the neck, this is really clean. Oh, okay, there's a tiny little bit of staining just under the finish along the bottom. There's wear. Maybe a bit of rock and roll sweat has crept under the finish there. There's no markings on the neck, it's definitely not fender, but then I wasn't expecting it to be. And then it's just a few bits of gunk where the body protrudes out of the, or the neck sits up proud of the body, so let's get rid of that. It's under the finish. And there we have a neck. So let's just have a look at these tuners. Again, there's lots of mechanical bits and little edges, and you know, tuners, they don't really get much love. Probably haven't really had much of a clean in 30 years, so let's take the opportunity to get into them. These are pretty decent. As I say, a lot of the later Squiers, they come with sort of trapeze shaped tuners with a sort of stamped tin body, and they really are rubbish, and the first thing that most people do with a Squier is chuck them. But with these haven't needed it because they're absolutely fine. They're basically kind of Grover style with a cast body, sealed for life, and yeah, they have got tensioning screws at the end, so if there is any backlash in them, I can adjust that, just part of the setup. Let's get into all the little nooks and crannies under the buttons. Again, you can tell that it's not had much cleaning done simply because a wipe with a damp cloth and it's just bringing it back nicely. Okay, and there we have a neck. I'm just going to polish up the string trees, whack them back on, and then I'll be putting the neck back together, or the neck back on the body. So that's the neck cleaned up and looking lovely. The next thing I'm going to do is just check where we're at with the frets. Now, I'm not intending to do a fret job on this guitar, and I certainly don't think it needs it, but I'm just going to check for any high frets, and I can always spot level if there's anything that needs it. So this is us on the last legs now. I've spent a bit of time setting it up. I tried it a couple of times actually because it's quite it's got quite high saddles, so I tried it with a neck shim to see whether I could bring the action in line but have lower saddles, but I couldn't get a setup that I liked, so I actually did it a couple of times. So the way I've got it set up now, there is no shim, which is how it came, without a shim, and I've set it up to about 4/64 on the bass side and just under about 3.5 on the treble side, so it's nice and low. It's got a tiny little bit of relief, not a huge amount, it's quite flat, it's quite a decent neck, so that's, and it's playing really well. I've set the pickup heights, I've set the intonation, and it's all ready to go. So give it a nice bit of wax here, and then I'll be dropping her off. Well, play her in first, I'll give you a wee sound demo, and then I'll be dropping her off back to my customer shortly. And in the meantime, I'll just do a little bit of an additional coat of wax, which just gives it the final sheen. And then I'll do some close-ups so you can see what a difference it's made. But fairly transformed, I'm very pleased with her. I think she looks fantastic. I think it's another lease of life for a 35-year-old guitar, which was well deserved. Sounds nice, plays well, and this is the kind of thing that I can do to your guitar. So come and have a look at the website, alansguitarshack.com, and if you'd like me to give your guitar some TLC like this, then drop me a line. Okay, that's me. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll just do a few silent shots towards the end just to leave you with, and I might do a little bit of playing as well. you.